Hello again. This is Harriette Chandler, and this is The Chandler Chat, a show that brings you interesting people to talk about some of the many interesting things going on right here in Worcester. And our guest today is Peter Dunn, who is the Executive Director, CEO, President. What have I left out, or what have I added?
You got two of them, President and CEO.
President and CEO of the Greater Worcester Community Foundation. And lest I forget, ever, he gave me a little gift of mints, and it says these are called endowments. A clever name. We've never had anything like this. You're going to put your special mark on Worcester, no question about it. So tell me, what do you do?
So we could take up your whole show talking about
Not the mints.
Yeah, what the Community Foundation does. But ultimately, community foundations are place-based foundations. There's a community foundation in every community locality across the country that are designed to really do two things. Number one, to create more permanent charitable resources for the benefit of a community. And number two, to create change and impact in the community, either for nonprofit organizations, for individuals, or for the community at large. So we're philanthropies that are fundamentally place-based in a metropolitan area, and we're designed to create permanent, endowed, charitable resources, a community savings account to really help the community move forward and prosper in the future.
Well, I got to know, I've been an incorporator for a while, but I really got to know the Greater Worcester Community Foundation when we had our first effort of immigration coming into Worcester, and your incredible role in helping to make that possible. And so you do many things. You wear many hats, and you are able to kind of roll with whatever the needs are. I'm not expressing this well, but you accept the needs and you go take it from there.
Right. I mean, one of the interesting things about our work is that it's complex and dynamic, and we're a reflection of the donors who've created charitable funds at the foundation. And so we're in many different things. We're the largest scholarship provider in the region through the scholarship funds that we manage. We help local nonprofit organizations manage their endowments for the benefit of their organizational missions. We work with individual donors to facilitate their philanthropy and the things that they want to support. And then we're the steward of many, many different legacies and bequests that have come to us over the last 50 years for the purpose of improving the community. Mm-hmm. And so what you just mentioned about immigration, some of our resources are very flexible, and that allows us to pivot and meet the moment in certain cases. Sometimes that means providing flexible funding. Sometimes it means convening and helping organizations come together. And sometimes it's patient capital. It's being able to stick with something over time as opposed to something that might be immediate. So we're in a lot of different things. I think one of the challenges in philanthropy is communicating all the different things that we do.
Which is hard to do when you do so many, actually.
Right. And in our case, we're not just one foundation. We're like 600 all managed collectively for the benefit of the Worcester County.
Maybe you ought to explain that to people, because some people understand a philanthropist as a person who does one thing with their own funds. But for the small person, the person whose funds are there's less funds to deal with, they feel that they're sort of left out. And how do you fit into that picture?
So we were designed to really be a place that could be accessible for folks coming to charitable giving at multiple different points. But currently, the Community Foundation administers about $200 million that's spread across 600 different named charitable endowment funds. Those funds range from $10,000 at the smallest to $15 million at the largest. So there's a huge spread there, right? Annually, we distribute about $10 million in grants. We make about 2,000 individual different grants a year. So there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of complexity. But one of the points that you raise is that we are accessible for folks who have a desire to, be able to create a scholarship for a student every year, or to be able to create a fund that will provide constant support to an organization that they really loved. Any number of different things.
You sent a beautiful, beautiful obituary, really, about Harry Dewey, who was one of the founders of your foundation. And it speaks well of why he got interested. One person got interested. But you're way up beyond that. He would be the first to acknowledge that you're much more varied now, 50 years later?
Yeah.
So this is important, what you're doing.
It was tremendously moving to us, and I have to say, I'm in my personal background, I'm a recovering lawyer, right? My early career in my 20s, I was a litigator, and Harry was obviously
he was wonderful. He
wonderful,
was a wonderful person.
Immensely respected attorney here in Worcester, and it was tremendously meaningful to me that part of the conversation after his passing was he noted that the founding of the Community Foundation was one of the most personally and professionally satisfying things that he accomplished during his professional career. It's just massively moving for us, right? Given how civically engaged he was, how many boards he was on. Community foundations are fascinating vehicles that can help a community in interesting and strategic ways, but we're really about harnessing philanthropy for the benefit of a place, right? And then using those funds in hopefully smart ways that help our community move forward.
And you're flexible enough to be able to move quickly when need be. I was involved with your immigration issue, and I can tell you that you were able to move very quickly in raising the money and dispensing the money. And there was a feeling, and we got money from the state for it as well, to join the money that we were able to raise. And there was no question in the minds of the people in Ways and Means, and for example, in the House and the Senate, that if we gave, and in that case, we gave $10 million, and we gave it to, the question is, who do you give that kind of money to that you can trust, that will make sure it gets to the right place? There was no question about who to give it to, because the reputation of the Greater Worcester Community Foundation has gone on now for some 50 years.
Well, and that you were present and colleagues were present at the decision on how to partner with community foundations across the state to have an impact in a way that gets to people quickly. I can tell you that one of the byproducts of that was that our peer network across the state is now much more collaborative. There's a lot of...
Is there really?
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. The CEOs of the foundations get together regularly. We're talking about policy issues at the state level and how we interact with them. Where does philanthropy fit with any number of different issues going on in the state? So that engagement with the state took us into a new sphere, more policy-centered, and also, I think, made us more comfortable with engaging with elected officials around how philanthropy can be a partner to address issues.
But actually, policymakers have to know who you are, too.
Exactly.
It's a partnership.
Yeah.
And after what we've already begun, I am assured that with your appearance on the scene, that will be continued. We didn't even know, this is pathetic to say, but we didn't even know whether we'd be able to find other similar organizations in other communities in Massachusetts. And we had somebody counting how many there were and where they were, and the fact that we had them in most communities. There's some 15.
There's 15 across the state, and we cover the whole state.
Yeah. And people trust them in their own community. They know who they are, which is very important, and they trust them. We usually trust the people that we know, and that is exactly what happened. So what's on the top of your list at this point in time?
Well, there are a number of things. Number one, I think I am focused on making sure that we do a better job of communicating, of sharing the story. One of the things that I've discovered in my short time in Worcester is that at the Community Foundation, we have tremendous stories in history.
You absolutely
right?
do.
But one of the challenges is getting the story out and helping people understand where philanthropy has fit, how donor visions have been put forth into funds that are having an impact. Every one of our scholarship funds has a story behind it, for instance. It goes on and on. So we are going to be paying more attention to storytelling. And I think the storytelling helps people understand philanthropy as a sector of what foundations do. And also, I think, inspires more giving. It inspires more people to think about, okay, I loved this community. I made my life and my business here, and I want to support it in some way. Right, so communicating is a thing that.
And who do I go to do that?
Right.
I mean,
right.
The question of who, because your good giving is often done very quietly.
Right, and sometimes we take a humble approach and we're kind of quiet in what we do. So there's a balance there, right? We want to be able to communicate and tell the story, but do it in a way that inspires people and builds confidence ultimately. Another thing that I am thinking about is there's in our work there's often a balance between being responsive and being strategic, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. But to give you an example, we have many nonprofit organizations that come to us for grants, and we support them with both operating general funding as well as project grants. But we've also been involved in some strategic work around issues like food security and early childhood and some other issues. And so one of the things I've heard as I've gone around and listened and talked to people since my arrival is a desire for us to go deeper in the strategy work and over a longer period of time, looking at specific community data and how metrics can be moved over time. We have a relatively modest funding base to be able to do that work, but foundations can be, to your point earlier, we can be flexible, we can do things the government can't do, and we can also build more resources that beyond what we have. So that strategy versus responsive is a thing that's on my mind too.
You can also set up a base for the charity that can draw people to it, as you've done. You've done it with the LGBTQ plus community. That was helpful. You did it quickly, which made it a bit accessible, which may be and very legitimate, which it needed to have. You put your stamp on it. Yeah. It's like the Good House approval stamp, and it's very important to a lot of people because they've worked all their lives in many cases for the money, as you said yourself earlier, and they want to make sure that this money is being used well and carefully and thoughtfully.
Yes.
And there are ways for you to do that. You have the staff that can handle that. They wouldn't know how to begin. Law firms don't usually do that, but for a fee, they will do that. Banks don't do that, except for a fee. They will do that. So you offer, and you offer. I think the need for policy and your involvement in policy is well taken at this point in time.
Yeah, sometimes there are cases where if you really want to affect community change, you do have to get into policy, right?
You do.
I've had some of that experience in my past work in Syracuse, particularly around issues like lead poisoning and affordable housing. And it does get dicey and difficult in a state where you have a very dominant metro area, which is what we had in New York with New York City. But there are things you could do locally, right? And which
is what you should be doing,
right? And that's where we're going to have the ability to have more conversation and impact over time. What those issues are and how they manifest themselves, I think, is to be determined. But and no matter what we're not going to be able to do it alone. It's going to have to be collaborative.
Right. And you can do that as a convener. You can do that.
Yep.
Whereas there aren't many organizations that have that agency approach to things. And in many cases, you could be helpful because there are a number of organizations in Massachusetts that do exactly the same thing. I mean, not that, but they do 2 and 3 and 5 and 10 that are really looking at the same group. And that isn't smart. That isn't a smart way of handling it. It is much smarter to bring them together, and they get a lot more power for that. So did you do this sort of thing before?
I've been in this work, strangely enough, for about 30 years now. I was CEO of the Community Foundation in Syracuse for 15 years. I was the Chief Development Officer, the lead fundraiser for the Community Foundation in Los Angeles.
Really?
Before that. And then I worked for our trade association that works with all philanthropy in Washington, D.C. In the years before that, after I stopped practicing law. But I grew up in Buffalo.
Really?
While I've spent time in these big cities, Buffalo, Syracuse, Worcester, they're mid-sized metros. I often like to tell the story that when I came to Syracuse, I said to people, there are more children in the LA Unified School District than there are people in metropolitan Syracuse.
Was that true?
Right. There's 600,000 to 700,000 kids in the LA Unified School District.
Oh my goodness.
Which is more than there are people in Metro Syracuse. So that tells you something about the ability to have impact. In a city like Worcester or Syracuse, there's a 1 degree of separation where you're able to move things and have some satisfaction that you're having an impact. Larger cities, it's hard to move.
So what's success for you?
I'd say success it would take the form of several indicators. Number one, I do think it's important that the Community Foundation grow. We are designed to be a growing source of philanthropy, and I will view success when I know that we're helping to motivate more and more people to think of us as a resource for their own personal philanthropy and for their philanthropy in the future through their estate plans. That irrespective of the size of gifts that we might receive, I do think it's important based on the needs that we have here and the issues that we face. We have many people who have resources who love this place, and I want to make sure that we're thought of as a trusted place where money made here stays here. So that's number one. Number two, I love a bunch of the work that we do, right? We have been very active in things like helping nonprofits with their own capacity and their own organizational effectiveness. And I think the pandemic in some ways interrupted some of our work because we were doing other things because we had to do it, right? And we have been an advocate and supporter for nonprofit organizational effectiveness for a long time. And so what I would like to do is recommit to those issues, go deeper, spend more money, and help our nonprofit partners in a variety of ways.
So do you think you're not spending enough money at this point in time in terms of, in terms of the money you have, not the money you hope to get, but the money you have?
In terms of the money we have, it's a matter of allocation, right? And what I would like to do is go deeper on nonprofit capacity, because I think that's a space where we can get leverage. If we can help nonprofits with their own work and their missions and their business models, then that has a ripple effect out in terms of community. It's a good way for a funder that has relatively limited amounts of philanthropic capital to have an impact. And I'm not talking about gigantic sums of money, but I think it's an interesting strategy to me. We did some of this work in Syracuse. We have a great history of it here, and I want to recommit to it. Another success item for me, and I can put it out there, but it's a space that I'm just learning about here, is around the issue of housing. Right? So clearly there's a housing crisis. It's a big, nasty, expensive, difficult problem that has all these layers of issues to it. And for a foundation that has a relatively limited amount of philanthropic capital to deploy, how can you have an impact? And so one of the spaces that I'm interested in is what we call in our sector impact investments. So things like loans, loan guarantees, things that aren't grants, but our methods for us to use the philanthropic capital that have been entrusted to us in a way that can have an impact in new and creative ways. So using foundation assets in new ways to have an impact. And housing is the space that I'm interested in. I can put that out there, and then have lots of people ask me what that's going to mean, and I don't know. But I would say that I think it's. I think we are compelled to be engaged in that space. I just don't know how yet.
I think that's an incredibly needed area. I spent a couple of terms as the chair of housing, and I want to tell you, it's a tough area. It's a tough area. First of all, even if you can find an interesting approach to it, you're going to have the we's and the they's, and there are a lot of people who like things just as they are and don't want to change. And you've got to get over that piece, because there are too many people who can't afford, their children can't afford to live here. And we're driving our population out of Massachusetts is really what's going to happen.
Right.
I mean, I don't have to tell you this.
Yeah, you know, and I'm not even clear what the best policy solutions are and what the philanthropic opportunities are.
Neither is anybody else.
And the power dynamics are really complicated. The politics is really complicated. But I think that.
But you got to start somewhere.
We have to, and in Syracuse, the way we got at it was through lead poisoning, because the quality of housing was so abysmal that you had all these other issues. So in Syracuse, housing that was safe wasn't affordable, and housing that was affordable wasn't safe, right? So you had that dynamic. I think Massachusetts has done a better job than New York State around issues like that. So for a philanthropic funder, it's not necessarily looking for a magic bullet, but it's trying to find the best lane. Like, where does it make the most sense for us to be? And I don't know that yet.
Have you had a conversation yet with Ed Augustus?
I have met Ed.
No, not meet him. I think if you could lead your fellow funders in other communities, in the other 14, to talk about how you can be of help in this. He's smart too.
Oh yeah, and, absolutely. I met him briefly, but I haven't been able to have a conversation.
No, obviously, but I think that's a good start, because he is really taxed with the idea of solving this problem. And it's a very tough problem to solve. If we don't do something about it, and do something right now, we are going to have a serious flood of people leaving here because they can't live here anymore, and they can't live in our larger cities. And when I talk about our larger cities, Boston's out of the question at this point in time. And and they're all hooked in together, the transportation and the you know, I don't have to explain it to you, but it's a serious problem, and the funders might be the interesting way of getting there.
Yeah, I think for me it's going to be a learning journey. You know, I've been really focused on meeting folks and building confidence in our work.
Well,
and
you have to do that. That's your job.
But it's an area I want to study more and understand. And folks have been really generous with their thoughts about ways that we can engage. Housing, super complex, but it's intriguing to me, and I think it's an opportunity.
No, I think you're right. What other areas are you planning to focus on? Or invent? Or invent?
Well, I think another thing that's on my mind that has come up too is, and this was a similar issue in Syracuse, was the balance between urban communities and folks who are in rural or towns in the periphery. So, you know, our mission is to serve communities across Worcester County, and that's not just the city of Worcester. And so, and I've heard this several times in conversations, you know, about being mindful about our work, which is in an urban community. And then we also have funds and donors and things that we do that support work in more rural communities as well, villages and towns. And my intent is to make sure that as we do our work, that folks know that we're not just a city foundation.
That's very important, because they have the same needs of, I have this money, I've worked hard all my life. how can I see this put to good use? I don't have one of these foundations in my community, but I do 10 miles away, and or so forth. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, we have some funds that are for specific communities. We have a fund, Leicester Savings Bank used to be in existence, and we have an endowment that they left that we manage. We make grants in the Leicester community every year. Those are examples like that. We have multiple funds that do place-based grant making in communities outside the city, and so that's the thing I have on my mind. And as I get to know the region, I'll have a better fix on it. But to me, it gets back to the communicating, right? If we're telling the story and we're building confidence and we're building relationships, those things will come together.
I think they will come, and they'll come more quickly than you even realize, because you've been really working here for over a year. I mean, you've been a phantom, but you've been here. Your name is out there, although I guess we have several Pete Dunns.
We have multiple Peter Dunns. The other Peter Dunn is chief development officer for the city of Worcester, and he's 25 years younger than me, but still, we both are in these positions, and it's constantly amusing because I get emails from him and he gets emails from me, and
I'd like to have you come back on from time to time, if you don't mind, and keep us involved in where you're going and what you're doing and how it's going.
I'd love to do that.
That's important. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Pete.
Thank you so much.
We really want to say thank you to Peter, because he's going to be responsible for the future of our philanthropy, I think. I think that may be the future rather than the past. We have a very rich past, but things are changing, and we've got to keep up. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining us as well. This is Harriette Chandler saying goodbye for now. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you.